Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Graceologie with Gwen Smith podcast. I'm Gwen Smith, and I am so glad you've joined me today. Around here, we have fun, faith-focused, grace-filled conversations, all to help you know and trust God more. Our discussions are honest, often humorous, and always practical. And they're going to encourage you in meaningful ways to live out and lean on the grace of Jesus in the midst of cluttered, messy days. You got any of those? I know I do, and I can't wait to get to today's conversation, which is all about sex, purity, and the longings of a girl's heart. Today, my guest is Kristen Clark. Kristen is a fun-loving Texas girl who adores all things outdoors and drinks coffee every time she can. She and her sister Bethany Beal are co-founders of Girl Defined Ministry, and these two have an active online community where they speak boldly, boldly to the narrative of God's beautiful design for womanhood. Kristen and I had a really candid conversation today about the new book that she and her sister wrote called Sex, Purity, and the Longings of a Girl's Heart. Due to the mature nature of this topic, guys, I just want to warn you right now, this episode might be sensitive for younger ears. For the modern Christian woman living in today's sexually charged society, embracing God's design for sex and purity can often feel like an impossible pursuit. As the culture seeks to normalize things such as pornography, erotica, and casual sex, both single and married women of all ages feel immense pressure to conform. With alluring temptations constantly inviting us to join in, we might even begin to question whether God's design is truly good. Now, if you're single, divorced, or widowed, do not tune this out because this topic and episode is especially for you too. God has an incredible plan for our sexuality, and this message is one every woman needs. We've split it into two parts, and I'm excited to get started, so let's dive right in with the first half of my conversation with Kristen. Hey guys, I just want to say a quick thank you to all of you in the Graceologie community who have rated this show on iTunes or who have written a short review. It makes such a big difference. So if you happen to be listening and you've not yet done it, I would really appreciate it if you would. Would you click your podcast app or go visit iTunes and give us a 5-star rating or just a quick 1-sentence review? From my heart, it would really mean a lot. Well, hey, Kristen, I'm so happy to have you on the Graceologie Podcast today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I am excited to get to talk about this stuff with you.
Same. Okay, so one of the things we do around here to get to know you in a way that I'm not going to be able to figure out on your bio is we do a fast, fun favorites round. So are you ready to give that a shot?
Oh, yes. I will get my thinking cap on and see if I can even remember what my favorites are. In those moments, you're like, wait, I don't know what it is. So
we're just going to
let's give it a go.
There you go. Okay, Kristen, we'll start off easy. How often do you eat pizza?
Ooh, too much. At least once a week.
Oh, so that's about the same as me. Okay. What makeup item can you not live without?
Oh, it would have to be mascara because I am really fair skinned. And when I don't have mascara on, I have no eyelashes. So I need that mascara.
Perfect. Okay. What is your favorite indulgence at the county fair?
Probably funnel cakes. Yeah, for sure. Funnel cakes.
That's what I was wondering. Okay. And where did you grow up?
San Antonio, Texas. Good old hot Southern Texas.
It is hot. Would you rather walk 10 miles or jog 1?
Oh, probably walk 10. I love walking and hate running.
Same. Wow. Yes. Wow. We are sisters. Okay. Name one thing on your bucket list.
Go to Australia. I've done a lot of travel in Europe, but never Australia and New Zealand. So that's definitely on the list.
Perfect. Say something with an Australian accent.
Oh, gosh. I can't even do it. I couldn't even think of a word. Like, what can I even say?
Good day, mate. Come on.
Oh, good day, mate. Okay, there we go. Thank you for the prompt. I needed that.
Okay, Kristen, what's your favorite sport?
Definitely basketball. I am actually 6'1", so really tall, and played basketball growing up and still just love watching it. Can't really play anymore, but like watching it.
Okay, perfect. That was actually another one of my questions. Okay. If you could invite any living person to be your dinner guest, who would it be?
Princess Kate.
Very cool.
Yeah, that'd be kind of fun.
Yes, definitely. Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how good are you at dancing?
Ooh, I've actually taken some lessons. So I'm not the worst, but maybe like a 6.
Okay. All right, Kristen, what does a perfect day for you look like?
Oh, relaxing, going to the spa, taking lots of walks, drinking lots of coffee, and having brunch for every meal.
Fun. Definitely with avocados, right?
Oh, yes, for sure.
Okay. Name 3 things that you and your husband have in common.
Well, we're both really tall. We both love dogs, and we really enjoy traveling and having adventures together and doing a lot of outdoorsy stuff. So like camping and hiking and things in the wild.
That's awesome. Clearly, you don't get bit by bugs as much as I do. Okay.
Well, I don't know about that.
Okay. When you were little, what did you want to be?
I think for a while I wanted to be a teacher, but then I grew up and that changed.
Well, you're kind of a teacher now, just about.
I guess so, in a different kind of way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then final question is, how would your best friend describe you?
Probably joyful. I'm going to give myself all these compliments here. Wonderful, joyful, the most amazing. Hopefully just down to earth Texas girl who loves deep conversations and goofs off and has fun and loves the Lord. We'll go with that.
All right. I love it. That's a great way to describe someone. So, well, I'm having you on today to talk about this message that God has you right in the middle of, and it's your new book that is just coming out called Sex, Purity, and the Longings of a Girl's Heart. So the subtitle is Discovering the Beauty and Freedom of God-Defined Sexuality. Yes. So, wow. Like, did you ever expect that this is going to be the topic God has you speaking on?
Oh, my goodness, never. And my sister and I, so we co-authored it together, and we just laughed because we're like, this is only the Lord. We would have never, ever picked this title or this topic in a million years. Right. So even when we wrote our first 2 books, like, the first one was on womanhood, and then we talked about love and relationships, and those are fun topics. This is like nitty gritty, digging into just such deep stuff. There's so much pain. There's so much confusion. Yeah. And so we did not want to write on this. Honestly, we weren't planning on it, but as we listen to our audience and just so many of the young women and women who follow us over at Girl Defined, they were asking so many questions about this specific topic, about sexuality and sex, and I'm single and I have these longings, or I've made these mistakes in my past. Can God forgive me? Or just so many questions that they would say, I've never asked anyone these questions and I'm really struggling and I'm hoping you can help me. And so as we saw these emails, we thought, this is a topic that we as women have a lot of questions about. Because I think for a long time, especially in the church, we kind of categorize these questions as man questions. Yeah. Like, guys have questions about sex and they have questions about lust and they have the Bible studies on these kind of things. But us as women, like, we don't have those questions. But, that's not true. We are just as much sexual beings. So as we saw these questions come in, they were resonating with our own hearts of questions that we've had and still have, and things we're working through and wrestling with. And so God just kind of opened the door through that and made it so clear that this would be a needed resource and something he was calling us to step into, even though we were kind of digging our heels in a little bit. But once we caught the vision of what it could be and just the need for it, and then God's grace, of course, working in our hearts to steer us in this direction, it just became so clear that this was the next book we needed to write.
Yeah, I love, God does not make things easy for those of us who are seeking his heart, especially if we're saying what next. He's often saying, let's go down this side path. And you're like, no, not that one. I want to stay on the big road, God. Exactly. So just to give context for my Graceologie community, go ahead and tell us a little bit more about your Girl Defined community and what you and your sister have built up and just that platform.
Oh, sure. So we run Girl Defined Ministries, like I mentioned, and it's really just a ministry geared towards helping all of us as women. So we have a lot of younger women that follow us, teen and college age, but then we do have a lot of women who are older and married, and they just love following along as well. But our core passion is just to help us as women understand God's design for our lives, specifically as women. So rather than being girls and women who are defined by the world, learning how to be women who are defined by God. So what does he say about, our purpose purpose, our calling, our marriages, our relationships, our longings, our desires. What does God have to say? And how can we align those with his word and his truth rather than looking to pop culture, which the messages are so strong and they're coming at us every day, and just not finding our identity and what the world says about us, but what God says about us. So that's what everything we do is geared towards. We have blog posts, we have a YouTube channel. So we do videos on a regular basis, and we love doing interviews like this. We travel and speak, have a conference here in San Antonio once a year as well. And then of course, write these resources as God opens the door. So that's really the heartbeat of what we do, is just helping all of us as women get back to God's design and really define our identity according to his word.
Yeah, that's hugely important. And I love that you're doing it with enthusiasm and that you get to do it with your sister, which is what a blessing. That's so cool.
It is so fun.
So I know that you said, these are questions and curiosities and, all of the things that women want to talk about in your community. So when it comes to sex and purity and longings, it's like, do we really need to talk about this stuff?
Oh, I know, right? Yes. Like, do we have to?
I mean, so, your community, let's say it's high school, it's college, it's younger professionals and some young married. Who needs to talk about this? Is it just the single girl? Is it the young professional? Like who do you think needs to have a conversation about sex, purity, and in longings of a woman's heart?
Right. Well, I think there's been some misconceptions in the church. I definitely bought into these where the topic of sex was mostly centered around purity within the church. So it's like, if we're talking about sex, we're talking about purity, and purity is only for single women. So therefore, if we're going to talk about this at all, it's going to be geared towards single women, teen, college age, and that's who the conversation's for. But as we zoom out and look at God's word, we see this is a conversation that is so much bigger than purity. It is so much more in depth than just purity. It's so much more than the do's and don'ts, the yeses and nos. God has an incredible, beautiful plan for our sexuality. And it's something that he wants every single one of us as women, whether we're 14 or 70, to understand and to embrace, whether we're single or married, because it impacts so much of our lives and so much of our thinking. And so our hope in writing this resource is to really say, like, hey, Christian women, this conversation is for all of us. Let's start this conversation. Let's walk into this. It is so much more than purity. Yes, that's a small part of it, and God has a plan for that, but that's not all God has to say about this. And so really trying to cast the vision for what his plan for sexuality is, and that it is so much more beautiful than I think what we grew up in the church hearing.
Yeah. And I was really hoping you would go there, because I want to challenge every single one of my Graceologie girls who are listening that if you think you are off the hook because you're like, oh, I'm married, I don't need this conversation. Right. Yes, you do. So you better stay tuned. Today's episode of the Graceologie with Gwen Smith podcast is sponsored by my absolute favorite seasonal subscription box, FabFitFun. Receive 20% off your first box when you go to fabfitfun.com and use the code Graceologie. Have you tried it yet? If you don't already know about FabFitFun, it's a seasonal box with high-quality, full-sized beauty, fitness, and lifestyle products. I love it so much. It retails for $49.99, but always has a value of over $200. And getting your FabFitFun box in the mail actually feels like it's your birthday, like 4 times a year. I love it. So head over to fabfitfun.com and use coupon code Graceologie for 20% off your first box. I'm telling you, you're going to love it. The way you start off the book, you and your sister, is you tell a story about something your sister found and how that impacted you. And here's the deal. I appreciated this so much to establish the foundation of your book, because every single one of us have a story like this. We all.
Absolutely.
And so I was like, well, thank you, because it really makes a difference. Can you go ahead and kind of tell that story to the Graceologie community? And then we're going to, we're just going there.
Good. I love it. I love that you're just going there. So yeah, when I was probably 9 or 10 years old, and my sister's a little bit younger, so she was probably 8 at the time, and we were just playing outside, innocent. I didn't even know what sex was yet. I mean, I had seen the word on magazines, but I didn't really know anything about it and hadn't had the chat with the parents yet. And we're just hanging out outside. And then we come across this magazine in the street that someone had left, and it was really worn and dirty, and it had been run over by cars. And we walk up to it and we stare down at it, and we're really confused by what we see, because we have never seen anything like this before. And we pick it up and we run inside because something just felt weird about it. And we go into one of the bedrooms and we close the door, and we're in there and we're just flipping through these pages. And what we were seeing was pornography. But at the time, we had no idea what we were looking at. We just knew, okay, something is weird about this. This doesn't feel right. What are these images we're seeing? Like, our little brains couldn't even really process what was happening. But we, looked through the magazine, and I can still, remember those images today, even it's like been over 20 something years, but we were really nervous and we just didn't know what to do. So we took the magazine. We didn't want to tell our parents for some reason. We were just, it was too weird. And so we actually ran down the street to where kind of the area where we found it, and then ended up burying the magazine by one of the neighbors' mailboxes. And we were just like, we don't ever want to see that again. We don't know what that was. That made us feel weird. That was so, like, we didn't know how to process it. So we buried it. And then from that point forward, I remember for me, that really launched me into a journey of wondering and questioning. I didn't really know exactly what I was questioning, because I didn't understand my sexuality and that God designed me that way and that He had a good plan for that. I just had these images seared in my mind and these things that I saw. And I just remember wondering, like, what was that? And then as I got older and, hit puberty and started having all these hormones, like, I understood more of what was going on, but still had so many questions. And even like dating back to that magazine, so many thoughts that would just bombard my mind, and really started struggling with lust at a young age. And that launched me into masturbation at a young age, which a lot of women don't even like to talk about, but that was part of my story. And I didn't know who to talk to. I didn't know who to ask. And I felt too ashamed to talk to my parents at the time, even though I know they would have lovingly had that conversation. But I knew they assumed that I probably had never seen anything or didn't even know what any of this was. And so I was like, if I say something, they're going to be shocked. They're going to be like, what? Wait, you've seen this? And so just feeling so ashamed, I kept it silent for years. And that, of course, just built on more struggles and more lust and more internal battles that were raging that I never spoke until I was much older. And so I think for so many of us as women, we've been on a journey. We've experienced things. We've seen things. We've had things done against us. We've done things. And for so many of us, these struggles and questions start at a young age, and the shame and the silence start to build until we end up going through so many years of our lives having never told anyone. And that was my story. And I think a lot of women can probably relate to that.
I definitely believe that a lot of women can relate to that. I think that we all have had those find the magazine moments, and it's not something we like throw on the table for discussion very often. So now that you've, brought that to the conversation, what lessons has God taught you through that? Because in the Christian community in particular, one of the, we are so heavy on the purity with young girls and when we're being raised. And I think that the conversations we're not having are just as damaging in some ways as the rules and regulations of just saying, no. Then you get married and it's yes. It's like turn on the switch. And it's like, are you serious? Because I mean, I'm even thinking about, my daughter is 18 and we did books with her, this is your body, all of that stuff that just help. I wanted to help her understand who God designed her and her sexuality. But even still in the context of trying to be different than the world, it's almost like we've robbed ourselves of the beauty of God's gift of intimacy and sex and our sexuality and our womanhood, where we're not comfortable talking about it. So what have you learned about conversations and for young people? Do high schoolers even want to talk to their parents about it? Is it what type of things has God taught you, and what kind of questions are being asked
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I've learned throughout my whole journey is that the conversations amongst us as Christian women, we need to be so intentional to phrase and talk about sexuality and sex and intimacy in a really positive light. Like you're saying, casting the bigger vision of why did God create you to be a sexual being? What is the purpose behind that? And then launching into what that is and why it's so beautiful and God's plan and his reasonings for creating us as beings who desire intimacy. We long for relationship, and how ultimately that's a reflection of the deep relationship that God wants to have with us. And then painting that bigger picture of why did God create men and women and sex and place it within marriage? What was the point of that? And then zooming out and seeing that bigger picture of the covenant marriage, which reflects the covenant relationship that God has with his children and the beauty and just the metaphor that so much of our sexuality represents and how it reflects so much on who God is and how he loves us. And so I just think that would do it would just create so many beautiful conversations, especially amongst like the teens and the college age. For any moms listening who may have even younger girls, like say they're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, they're kind of slowly growing up, to have these conversations, that are right for their level and their age, but just painting a beautiful picture of God's design. Because I think the more we steer the conversation towards what God created and intended our sexuality to be, then I think those conversations about the things he didn't intend it to be, so the lust and the pornography and the masturbation and the struggles that we wrestle with in our hearts, it will become so much more clear why those are missing the mark, why those are falling short of what God really intended for us, the beautiful intimacy that he desires to have with us, and then how we can embrace those longings rightly one day within marriage. I think it'll cast a vision, and we'll be striving towards something instead of always striving away from something. Like, okay, don't do that. Stay away from that. Don't think about that. And we start to feel like, okay, is my sexuality the problem? Like, is it a curse? Because I feel like it is, instead of recognizing there's a bullseye that God has for us. It is so beautiful. Let's aim towards that. And then as we wrestle with sin and we struggle, we'll be able to so clearly see, okay, I need God's grace. I am a sinner, but he has a good plan. Keep your eyes forward. So I just think that conversation, whether girls are little, teens, and then for all of us as women, 30s and beyond, if we could just even reframe our own perspective of sexuality to have that positive biblical perspective, I think it would change the way we talk about this.
I think that's really well said. Now, one thing you mentioned is that our relationship sexually with, a spouse really echoes a covenant relationship with the Lord. Now, that's a big Christian word, and some of my listeners might not know what you mean by that. Can you unpack that a little bit? What does it mean to have that covenant relationship?
This is such a beautiful thing that I didn't understand until I was probably, like mid-20s. So I got married around 24, and I don't think I really even understood this concept as much until afterwards. And so it's just such a beautiful picture as I was digging into God's word and just seeing that, we look at Adam and Eve in Genesis and we see God so intentionally creating a man, a woman, marriage, and then he places sexuality and more sexual intimacy within the marriage covenant. So we see God establishing this pattern of this relationship. And when I say covenant, essentially a covenant just means a promise that can't be broken.
Yes.
And so we see God placing Adam and Eve in this marriage, sanctifying it, creating this covenant, this bond where he's saying you are meant to be together for life. So no matter what happens, this is supposed to be a promise that can't be broken. And of course, there's sin and there's brokenness. And so I know many women have gone through divorce, and it is very painful. And so my heart goes out to any woman listening who's been through that. But God's original intent was that marriage would be a covenant. And the reason is that it would be a picture of two people coming together saying, I will not break this promise. This is a promise that cannot be broken, was because God's love for his people, as you kind of zoom through and you see his relationship in the Old Testament with the Israelites, I'm getting a little theological, but he made a covenant with them. And I think it's so interesting that God used the same word for marriage and for his relationship with his children to say, I am a covenant keeping God. I am entering into a relationship with my people. And this relationship is so strong that no matter what you do, this is a promise to love you that I will not break. And that's incredible when you think of us having a God like that. who loves us unconditionally, who enters into a covenant with us. And so in marriage, it's just such an amazing picture to think, wow, this earthly relationship between a husband and wife is actually an earthly physical metaphor of the incredible covenant love that our God has for us. And that's the picture he desires for us as Christian marriages to display, that the world would look and say, wow, there is something different about that. And that would be us reflecting who God is and how he loves us.
Absolutely. And I love how that narrative is not exclusively for the married person, but so I just, cause it is about that intimate promised relationship. And so our covenant God, so whether you're on the purity part of being single or widowed or, just not in a marital relationship, or whether you're on that sexuality part, we are talking about womanhood as a whole, is that God gives us this beautiful picture of his unbreakable, unshakable love it's a forever promised bond. And I think that if we're talking about the longings of a girl's heart, I mean, come on, that is at the center of it.
Yes, we desire intimacy. We desire a deep relationship. And that's something that even within marriage, I've had to remind myself of over and over again, because as women, we are relational. We're so relational, right?
Yes.
And we go in packs to the bathrooms and we love the social stuff. And, we like to be together and we like the sisterhood, and guys just don't have that same vibe going. And so I think our tendency though, and especially I've seen this since being married, we're coming up on 8 years of marriage, so don't have as many years as you, but we have a few under our belt. Yeah. And one of the things that I notice all the time is that I want to look to my husband to be my everything, to be the person who's going to fulfill me completely and fully. And I look to him to find my deepest satisfaction. And my husband is amazing. I will say, he's a pretty awesome guy, but he isn't perfect. And he wasn't created to fulfill those deep longings for that intimate relationship that only Christ can fill. And so as women, if we recognize that I was created by God and ultimately for God, and he loves me so deeply and wants to fill those deepest desires in my heart relationally. And if I look to him for that relationship, he will satisfy me. We see that in scripture, that he will satisfy us all throughout the Psalms. I love so many beautiful promises about there being pleasures forevermore, at God's right hand. That relationship with him is what we were made for. And so the less we can look to any earthly relationship or even any earthly sexual pleasure or anything physical, but rather looking to Christ for that, then he will satisfy us. And as a result, we'll be able to enjoy our marriages and our earthly relationships, even friendships, so much deeper.
Be sure to swing by the show notes to learn more about Kristen Clark and her book, Sex, Purity, and the Longings of a Girl's Heart, and also connect with her online, especially Instagram. Today's show is edited by Chad Shuping, and the music is by premiumbeat.com. If you have any questions, comments, or topic suggestions, I love hearing from you. Hit me with a message directly from my website at gwensmith.net. As always, all of the links and show notes from today's episode can be found at gwensmith.net/Graceologie. That's gwensmith.net/Graceologie. I hope you've enjoyed getting to know Kristen in part 1. Now be sure to listen to part 2, where we take the conversation even deeper into topics like embracing a higher and more beautiful, godly vision for your sexuality. We talk about freedom and forgiveness and the redeeming love of Jesus. Again, thank you so much for joining me today. If you haven't already subscribed, please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Graceologie with Gwen Smith podcast. That way you won't miss a thing. And be sure to share this episode with a friend who might need to hear this conversation. Now get out there and have a beautiful, grace-filled day.